Anybody's mourning the loss of Mr. Nasrallah, a known terrorist, a guy with American blood on his hands as well as Israeli blood on his hands. This is a terrorist organization. He was the leader of it. And I think people are safer without him walking around. But they'll try to recover. We're watching to see what they do to try to fill this leadership vacuum. It's going to be tough. Much of their command structure has now been wiped out.
White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby just this morning on CNN talking about the killing of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. That's where we will start. On our American Roundtable this morning with us today is Sabrina Siddiqui, White House reporter at the Wall Street Journal, and Domenico Montanaro, a senior political editor and correspondent at NPR, joining us for the first time. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. And hello to you both. Sabrina, I'm going to start with you. The U.S. President, Joe Biden, called that airstrike that killed Nasrallah, quote, a measure of justice for the victims of his reign of terror. What more is the White House saying about this latest development and what they're watching for?
Well, I think on the one hand, the White House is continuing to publicly back Israel in its military efforts targeting Hezbollah, as well as Hamas, of course. And I think that one of the challenges, though, that they're facing is that on the one hand, you heard National Security Council spokesman John Kirby right there say that praise essentially this as a measure of justice, but there's a lot of concern within the Biden administration about escalation in the Middle East. They have spent the last nearly 1 year now trying to de-escalate tensions in the region, and you're seeing the limitations of the Biden administration's relationship with this current Israeli government, where President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu for months now have clashed and disagreed behind the scenes on strategy, struggled to get to a ceasefire proposal. And so there is a feeling within the White House that while they're not criticizing this particular strike, they at the same time are concerned that the Israeli government is not listening or heeding their calls to de-escalate tensions and mitigate the prospect of an all-out war in the region.
Yeah, I mean, the strike happened after the U.S. and France and others called for that 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon. So you're quite right about not heeding those calls. Domenico, Kamala Harris also used similar language to the president, calling Nasrallah a terrorist with American blood on his hands. What does that tell us about how she might tackle this and how this issue might play out during the election?
Well, I think obviously a chaotic Middle East is not something that the Biden administration and, by proxy, Kamala Harris, who's the Democratic nominee for president, wants to see at all, because it certainly is not something that helps them look good at all. Doesn't help Harris in the campaign to have the focus be on this, because there's been this tricky balance that the Democrats have had to walk when it comes to supporting Israel versus what's been happening with the war in Gaza and being able to say that Palestinian people, deserve a right to peace and security and all of that. And now with this expanding to Hezbollah, it's something that it's not something that the White House would have wanted to see, certainly with just weeks to go until the presidential election.
Yeah, makes everything much more complicated. Let's talk a little bit about that election, Sabrina. Kamala Harris in California this weekend. She was at the U.S.-Mexico border on Friday talking about immigration, which of course is an issue that is sort of, I think she's vulnerable on, the Democrats are vulnerable on. What is being made of that visit and how she might be closing the gap on that issue?
Well, to your point, immigration is an issue where Democrats have increasingly been on the defensive. And when you look at polling, it's still the economy and inflation that tops the list of priorities for voters. But immigration often shows up in the top three issues. And I think that when you look at Vice President Harris and even President Biden, you've seen this shift somewhat toward the middle when it comes to the way they talk about immigration, talking a lot tougher, urging migrants not to come. And of course, the Biden administration having kept in place some of the very restrictive changes to asylum laws that were actually enacted under the Trump administration. So this is an effort, I think, by Vice President Harris to try and neutralize to the degree that she can an issue where Republicans have, at least politically and publicly, had the upper hand. She's also, of course, making a big appeal to independents, to suburban voters, and to moderate Republicans as she tries to assemble a winning coalition in November. There's always the risk that if they go too far in appealing to those groups, especially on an issue like immigration, and come off as if they're, not demonstrating the appropriate amount of empathy or being too hardline in their approach to immigration, that they alienate elements of the progressive base within the party. But I think that they largely feel like the voters who could make a difference on this issue are people who want to see the administration and Vice President Harris take a tougher approach. Of course, we'll see how it bears out. It's not the top priority, but it's part of this broader effort to get at those voters on the margins.
And Domenico, because the polls are just so tight in swing states, it really does speak to how important independents or undecided voters will be. You talked to some of those undecided voters. What are you hearing? What kinds of things are they wanting to hear from candidates to help them make a decision?
Yeah, I spoke to a handful of undecided voters, about 10 in our polling, where we had about 46 over the last few months who said that we could call them back. I got back to some of them. And this was right after the presidential debate between Harris and Trump. And 4 of them, all women, said that they were now moving toward Harris, that they maybe had some hang-ups about Biden's age and the like. They leaned much more Republican generally, but said that they just couldn't vote for Donald Trump. 3 others, I would say, are moving toward Trump a little bit more. 5 of them overall probably would never vote for Harris. But is the real question among those who said that they're now going to vote for Trump or wouldn't vote for Harris, whether they'll vote at all. Only 2/3 of registered voters even voted in the presidential election in 2020, and that was the highest since 1900 in this country. So, that's all experts believe that that's probably going to go down some. But I'd say immigration, as Sabrina was talking about, the economy are the 2 things that the people who said that they weren't going to vote for Harris that are big concerns for them. For those who said that they are going to vote for her or leaning toward her, they're talking about Trump's character and how he talks about women.
So how important is this VP debate on Tuesday then, Sabrina, between Tim Walz and JD Vance? I mean, normally, I don't know if it would matter so much, but because of how tight things are and because of these 2 personalities, it seems like maybe it will be a factor.
I think that there will be interest, of course, because these are 2 people who are not particularly well known on the national stage compared to some other prior VP candidates that we've seen in the past. But I also don't think it's going to necessarily have an incredibly consequential impact on how voters are approaching the election. I do think that there's much more interest in potentially another debate between President Trump or former President Trump and Vice President Harris. What I will say is that what we've seen with JD Vance, Trump's running mate, is that he has been somewhat of a drag on the ticket. He's had his favorability ratings or unfavorability ratings have been particularly underwater when it comes to how voters perceive him. He's often been in the news for comments that he's made about women, about moms, about parenting and having children, and he's kind of been a bit of a distraction. So I do think that there's more on the line for JD Vance, just given the attention that he has attracted, which is unusual for someone's running mate. And then at the same time, Tim Walz, he's popular in progressive circles, but people don't, again, really know a lot about him. How many people tuned into the convention, compared to an event like this? I think this is an opportunity to really see them debate policy and introduce themselves to the public in a much more significant and meaningful way. But again, I don't think this, unless there's a big unexpected moment, I don't think this would be the make or break moment for those undecided voters going into November.
Same to you, Domenico. How important do you think this is, this VP debate on Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think VP debates, people don't vote for the VP, so it's not going to be the thing that decides the election in any way, shape, or form. But I do think that the first rule of being a vice presidential running mate is do no harm. And if there's some big problem or some big thing that comes up that JD Vance or Walz say that where they're off message from the principal, then it could present a problem for the campaign that they didn't want.
Okay, well, we'll be watching. The 3 of us will be watching anyway on Tuesday. Thank you both very much. Really appreciate your perspective. Sabrina, Domenico, thank you for joining us. Hope you come back. Have a good Sunday, you guys. Thanks.